Hello, everyone. This is Group 3, and our topic today is about the principles and approaches to a curriculum design. And we have three members in our group. My name is Duyen, and I will be in charge of the first part. Big Ngọc will follow the parts in the next section, and Phương Huyền will be the last speaker. So now let's talk about the first sections. Number one, I will talk about the principles to curriculum design. There will be 20 principles according to Nation and McAllister in 2010, and those principles based on the pedagogical perspective, focusing on the curriculum design and teacher training. Those principles have been ranked in order of the importance. It means that if I say number one, it means that it is the most important principle according to those researchers. And for Nation and McAllister, there will be three subdivisions or three sections of the principle. The first one is the content and sequencing, which is about what goes into a language course and the order in which language items appear in the course. The second section will focus on the format and the preparation, which is about what actually happens in the classroom and during the learning. We will talk about the activities and the materials assessed. And for the last part, we'll have two principles. They are about monitoring and assessment, and we are going to discuss some degree of evaluation. Number one, I will talk about the principles, content, and sequencing. Principle one, the vocabulary frequency. A language course should provide the best possible coverage of language in use, including high-frequency items, so that learners get the best return for their learning effort. A language course should give most attention to the high-frequency items, and for the low-frequency items, they should be only introduced after acquiring the high-frequency items. For example, in a course, we should include some words, some language items such as vocabulary, which are commonly used in the reality. And then we will just introduce some strategy to learn the low frequency items. Because you know that learner may be not interested in or maybe cannot put their effort just to learn some strange words. Principle number two, a language course should train learners in how to learn a language so that they can become effective and independent language learners. For some learning coping strategies, Wolf, Fillmore, and Neumann in the 1983 and the 1996 already proposed that we have some kind of learning strategies like deep processing of language and content, vocabulary learning cards, word path strategies, mnemonic strategies, for example, keyword predicting, note-taking strategies, or we can have some copying strategies such as inferring vocabulary from context or copying with complex sentences. And to boost the learner autonomy, we will have some kind of principles. And we should focus on the learner goals, the language learning process, task, learner strategy, reflection on learning. Principle number three, learners should have repeated opportunity to notice target items in various contexts. There are two ways of checking the repetition of wanted items. The first one, we can focus on the frequent tests. Those frequent tests will decide if the wanted items are learned or not. And for the second way, we can choose a small group of very useful but likely to be neglected items so that we can keep a note of the repetition of these items. Principle number four, the language focus of the course needs to be on generalizable features of the language system. The features needs to be predominantly common in reality because no one wants to learn some strange word and it is not used in reality practice. And the second idea here is that the features should be generalizable. It means that learners can apply creatively in various ways and situations. For example, when we learn grammar, the teacher often hope to teach the student some common grammar structures. For example, the present simple tense, because it can be applied in various situations in the reality. And now let's move to the principle number five. A language course should progressively cover useful language items, skills, and strategies. To check whether it covers all useful items, skills, or strategies, teacher should list the items to be learned in each lesson in detail, and this course should check whether each learning task has the goal to fit the course plan. I put on the screen here an example of a task that is taught in the lesson of student grade 10 about the skimming skills. So in the skimming skill, the aim of the lesson is that the student can identify the general idea so that they can design the task which fit this goal. For example, here they provide a text and then they require the student to match the headings with the paragraphs. So if the student are able to match the headings, it means that we can achieve the goal of the course. Principle number 6. The teaching of language items should be learned in a favorable sequence and only when the learners are ready. The order to learn new structures, we will talk about the structures with less arrangement, which should be learned before the structures with more arrangements is needed. Or in other words, we consider the level of difficulty of a language structures. For example, here, a teacher may teach various kinds of grammar structure, but they should follow the order of a question. The first one, the teacher teaches student how to ask a question like, will John come? And then in the next level, the teacher can teach the student, when will John come, by adding the WH question at the beginning of the question. And in the next level, the student can be taught, when will John arrive? We have the arrive here is the next level and the higher level of the word come. So we should follow the order. Principle number 7, the course should have the learners to make the most effective use of previous knowledge. According to Lado and Ringburn, the first language has a major effect on the second language learning. For example, in vocabulary, English people some can learn Italian words based on the similar spelling. Or in grammar, we can learn conditionals in English and Vietnamese, and there will be some kind of similarities between them. For example, we have the structure if it will be similar to nếu thì in Vietnamese. Principle number 8, the items in the course should be sequenced to create positive learning effects and avoid interference effects. Research show that if we learn at the same time, the items with strong meaning relationships such as false opposites, the near synonyms, or the free associates, they will be the biggest interference. It means that we can make the learning of the student become more difficult. So the item with less connection may be learned more effectively. So that is the result, which is very opposite to the conventional idea and ideology of the teachers and the stakeholders. Now let's move to the part number 2, which is about the format and preparation principles. Principle number 1, the learner should be interested and excited about the learning the language, and they should come to value this learning. So it is advisable that the student should have a good attitude, motivation, significantly the intrinsic motivation, and the teacher should attract learners by using relevant and exciting subjects, giving choice and decision to learners, or setting tasks with clear outcomes. Principle number 2, a course should have a balance of the 4 strands: learning-focused input, language-focused learning, meaning-focused output, and the fluency activities. The principle concerned with the division of time, because the time, it needs to be equal among 4 strands of the total language experience in class learning and even out of class. And the course designer shouldn't neglect or overemphasis of a strand is a major failing in many language courses. Principle number 3, a course should include interesting, comprehensible, receptive activities. The receptive activities here include reading and listening activities. The underlying idea here is that learners need to build understanding of a language system before they are called on to produce language. For example, when you want to improve the reading, we can display the books open in the class cases, and in one day you can open the new page so that when the student come by, they can stand still and then they can read the new page of the book so that they can get some kind of information. And for the listening, teacher can improve this skill by have the regular time listening in each lesson given to the student, or giving tape stories to listening at home or at class. So we can also have some tasks such as listening to pictures or listening and drawing or using some bad questions. Principle number 4, a language course should provide activities to improve learners' fluency with the language they already know. Fluency is a part of the skill goal of the language learning and showing learners productive ability of what they have learned. For example, when we learn how to speak, there will be the technique of 4, 3, and 2. This technique is about the teacher will invite the student to give the same talk at 3 different times, but in different amount of time for each time, for each trial. For example, the first trial, there will be 5 minutes speaking. For the second, is 3 minutes speaking. And for the last part, there will be only 2 minutes speaking so that the student can accelerate the way they speak. Principle number 5, the learner should be pushed to produce the language in both speaking and writing over the range of discourse types. According to Swin in the 1985, uh, he argues that the language knowledge needed to comprehend language is not the same or often larger the language knowledge needed to produce language. So a 4-skill course should have at least 20% of the total learning time, which is given to the activities involving language production. And it also lets learners who do language in both formal and informal settings for transactional and interactional purposes in various social roles and power relationships. Principle number 6, the course should include language-focused learning in the sound system, vocabulary, grammar, and discourse area. There will be some activity examples of language-focused learning, including dictation, listening for particular words or phrases, repetition and substitution drills, or memorizing dialogues and poems, and etc. The next principle is about maximizing the time using and focusing on the second language. Research shows that learners are not worried by having owned the lesson completely in foreign language, and learners spend little time on tasks due to the lack of interest or be confused by many formats or techniques of the teachers. So, how to increase them? Teacher can add some comparative factors or giving scores to the student for each task. They can also clarify the goal and tell student how to achieve it by doing the task. Or they can also let the student choose the activities by themselves. The next principle is about learners should work with the target items as deeply and as thoughtfully as possible. Some examples of techniques here is that in vocabulary, we can have little translation of meaning, and instead, we can ask the student to explain the definition in foreign language so that the student can guess the meaning based on the context. Or in reading, a teacher can let the student guess the topic of each paragraph through the first sentences. Principle number 9, the course should encourage with favorable attitudes to the language users, the use of language, the teacher's teaching skills, and the chances to success in language learning. There are 4 aspects to boost the motivation because all of this will considering the motivation of the learners. And the way to boost it include creating basic motivational conditions, generating initial student motivation, maintaining and promoting motivation, encouraging positive retrospective self-evaluation. And the last principle, which is also the last part of my presentation, is the principle number 10. There should be opportunity for learners to work with the learning material in ways that most suits their individual learning style. So for the last principle of this section, we consider the individual learning style. A language course allows for these individual differences and provides its choices and flexibility in the way activities can be done. And there will be some aspect that we can consider. It can be group size, speed and intensity, medium representation of information, mental process, understanding, use of first language, or the source of control. So that is the last part of our presentation today. And now let's move to picking up to talk about the last principle of the third section. Thank you for everyone for listening. Now, Big Ngọc, please. On.
Hello everyone, my name is Trần Thị Bích Ngọc and I will continue our presentation. The third section is monitoring and assessment, and in this section, it contains two class principles. So the first one, as you can see on the slide, it is about the material in language course. So the selection or gradation, presentation, and assessment of the material in the language course should be based on a careful consideration of the learners and their needs, also time and resources, and the teaching condition. This principle stresses the importance of doing environment analysis and needs analysis during the planning of the course. And the second principle is that learners should receive helpful feedback, which will allow them to improve the quality of their language use. So there is actually a checklist that we can use as a guide to check that there is sufficient feedback in a course. So the first one is that do the learner have regular opportunities for careful language production? Number two, do the learners have appropriate checklists or skills to monitor their written work? And has the teacher set up a peer checking system to make sure that the skills are used? Number three, does the teacher have a realistic list of aspects of language use that learners can be encouraged to monitor? Number four, do the learners regularly do information gap or opinion gap activities which encourage peer negotiation? Number five on the checklist is that do the learners wish to receive feedback about the language used from the teacher? Number six, does the teacher make use of a process approach to writing and formal speaking? Number seven, is the teacher aware of the aspects of the writing and speaking processes where the learners most need help? And number nine, do learners understand the marking system? Number eight, does the teacher make regular use of an informative and acceptable marking system for written work? And the last one, do learners understand the marking system and make use of the feedback? So those are the two principles, and that is also the end of the first part. Now let's move on to the second part of our presentation, which is curriculum approaches. So development and implementation of language teaching programs can be approached in several different ways, each of which has different implications for curriculum design. So in our presentation, we will introduce three approaches, and and though approaches differ in terms of input, process, and outcomes. So before introducing the three approaches, I will give you a definition of those terminology. So first of all, input, that means it refers to the linguistic content of a course. About process, it refers to how teaching is carried out and constitutes the domains of methodology in language teaching. Methodology encompasses the types of learning activities, procedures, and techniques that are employed by teachers when they teach, and the principle that underline the design of the activities and exercises in the textbook and teaching resources. And lastly, output refers to learning outcomes. For example, it can be a standardized test such as TOEFL, or it can also be the ability to familiar with the differences between two different grammatical items of our students, such as they can distinguish between the present simple tense and the past simple tense. So in simple form, the components of curriculum and their relationship can be represented as input, syllabus, process, methodology, output, and learning outcomes. So together, the curriculum development in language teaching can start from either input, process, or output, and each starting point reflects different assumptions about both means and ends of the teaching learning. So we will introduce you the three approaches, which are forward design approach, central design approach, and backward design approach. Get into forward design. So as you can see on the slide and the diagram I provide you, forward design is based on the assumption that input, process, and output are related in a linear fashion. So curriculum design is seen to constitute a sequence of stages that occur in a fixed order, an approach that has been referred to as waterfall model, as in the research of Tesmer and Wetman 1990, where the output from one stage serves as the input to the stage that follows. Now let's have a look at the comparison of forward design waterfall model. So first of all, forward design, as in the research of Wiggins and McTighe 2006, the research gives an example of forward design, starting with the first point, choosing a topic for a lesson. Let's say we choose a topic, racial prejudice. And then we select a resource. For example, we choose the book To Kill a Mockingbird, and then we choose instructional methods based on the resource and the topic, like seminar to discuss the book and cooperative groups to analyze stereotypical images in films and on television. And finally, we as teacher choose questions to assess students' understanding of the book. Now let's compare to the waterfall model of McAllister and So 2006. The sequence of water model including goals, content and sequencing, formats and presentation, monitoring, assessing, and evaluating. So as you can see, the two, the forward design approach and waterfall model are similar to each other. So forward design or the waterfall model is most likely to be applied in the design of a commercial coursebook or in a well-funded curriculum design project. Both of these situations provide time and resources for systematic curriculum design so that designers can do needs analysis, consider the environment and principles, and prepare a syllabus and lessons in advance of the actual teaching. However, most teachers, they do not have this luxury and have to design and teach courses without the chance to have fully planned and researched them. So now I will introduce some examples of forward design approaches in language teaching in recent days. The first example is communicative language teaching, or CLT. So the development of a communicative syllabus replaces earlier grammar-based syllabus models. The approach has sought to bring about an effective communicative ability in learners as their ultimate goal. It starts with a model of language that is broken down into smaller units, elements of knowledge and part skills. These are sequenced from simple to more complex and built towards the desired learning outcomes. Second example is content-based instruction and content and language integrated learning. So they seek to develop language proficiency as well as the mastery of subject matter, critical thinking, and other cognitive skills through the use of a syllabus that integrates both language and subject matter, such as science, geography, history, and etc. And this is an example from Mejisto et al. 2008. The example illustrates in summary form the procedure used to develop a one-week science unit on volcanoes. The first step is that we will decide the content and language needed for the topic of volcano. The second one aims in terms of content learning, language learning, and skills learning are identified. Thirdly, resources chosen to facilitate a variety of whole class, group-based, and individual activities, focusing on different aspects of content and language. And lastly, informal assessment procedures used to assess student learning. So together, to wrap up the curriculum design process, associated with format design can be represented as the first step, content, and then we identify the syllabus, then we choose the methodology, and then comes the outcomes, and finally the assessment. So that's it about the forward design curriculum. And now let's move on to the last two approaches with the next presenter, Huyền.
Hello everybody, my name is Bùi Phương Huyền. Now I'm going to continue our presentation with the curriculum approaches, which are central design and backward design. Central design, in central design approach, the curriculum development begins with choosing teaching activities, techniques, and method. In this approach, the prime focus is on teaching methodology, and consideration related to input and output come into play at a later stage or even during the actual teaching process. And according to Clark 1987, teaching methodology is the initial focus, with input and output consideration addressed later or during the teaching process itself. And in figure number 6, implementing a central design, you can see the teacher will start with the methodology and then later comes with the content and the outcomes. Now I'm going to move to some central design in language teaching. The first one is novel methods of the 1980s. In the early 20th century, methods like audiolingual situational language teaching and early CLT relied on well-structured syllabuses. However, later in the late 20th century, new approaches emerged, focusing on classroom processes over predefined syllabuses. The methodology, it starts with teaching methods with content chosen to fit the methodology. And we have some examples. Their natural approach, silent way, and counseling learning. About the flexibility of novel methods, is they know fixed learning outcomes, content adapt to student needs and interests. There are also no predefined syllabuses. Syllabuses emerge from interactions and discussions. Learners discuss topics of interest and goals develop from the discussions. The next example in central design is task-based language teaching. The short form is TBLT version 1. About the overview, it is an approach that emphasizes tasks for language learning. The characteristic of this is that meaningful activities with information gaps requiring language and non-linguistic resources and leading to outcomes beyond language display. And it also uses specially designed tasks to drive language learning without fixed grammar syllabuses. The goal of this is to develop general language skills rather than specific context use. And it will be used and common for young learners and situations with less defined language needs. Another example is Dogma. It was introduced by Scott Thornbury. It emphasized conversational interaction, rejecting pre-planned syllabuses and material. The philosophy of this is that it views learning as experiential, holistic, and socially driven, motivated by communal and communicative needs. They know predetermined syllabus, language and content emerge from classroom interaction. The objective is to nurture students' language learning mechanism and acquisition agenda, and it can be similar to counseling learning, but without new age elements. The next example is post-method teaching. Teaching based on the teacher's personal beliefs and experience, not confined to specific method or syllabus. The teacher roles here, teachers create their approach relying on their unique insights and context. In the classroom, the teacher's principles guide classroom activity. The next example is the ecological classroom. The definition is that it's viewed the classroom as an ecology where learning is dynamic and interactive. When the classroom is as ecology, learning is about meaningful actions within the environment. And the learners come from diverse groups with contributions to each other and the teacher. The curriculum is shaped by learners' activity, needs, and goal, not predetermined material. The teacher guides learner toward relevant opportunities. Okay, so to implement a central design curriculum in figure number 7, interaction between elements of a central design. Here, teaching is interactive and the content evolves and the assessment will enhance learning. Now, I'm going to move to the last approach, which is backward design. Backward design starts with a careful statement of the desired results or outcomes. Teacher will choose appropriate teaching activities and then content are derived from the results of learning. According to the work of Tyler 1949 and Taba 1962, who viewed instruction as the specification of ends and a prerequisite to devising the means to reach them. So this is a process of backward design. Step 1, diagnosis of needs. Step 2, formulation of objectives. Step 3, selection of content. Step 4, organization of content. Step 5, selection of learning experiences. Step 6, organization of learning experiences. And the last step, which is determination of what to evaluate and of the ways of doing it. Now, we move to some examples of the use of backward design in language teaching. Firstly, it is backward design through objectives. Tyler's work had a considerable impact on curriculum planning and helped establish the use of objectives and planning units in instructional design. From the 1950s, educating teachers in how to describe learning outcomes in the form of objectives become a minor industry. And this is some criteria of the objective in backward design. That teacher had to be trained. First, they describe the aims of a course in terms of smaller units of learning. The second step, they provide the basis for the organization of teaching activities. And the last one, they describe learning in terms of observable behavior or performance. Even there are some good advocate to the backward design, still some criticism of objectives in curriculum planning. Objectives may prioritize efficiency over meaningful learning. They can lead to a mechanical approach to teaching. Broader educational goals might be overlooked. Critics often target narrowly defined behavioral objectives, and some prefer central-based curriculum planning. Needs analysis is also the part of the process by which aims and objectives are determined. The steps in need analysis are identify learners' communicative needs, develop statements of learning objectives, identify linguistic content and skills needed to attain the objectives, prepare course plans, and select material and teaching methods. The next example is task-based language teaching version 2. The methodology of this approach to TBLT is built around activities or tasks that require communicative language use. This is the development stages in task-based language teaching. Start from identifying target tasks, move to designing teaching tasks, identifying language needs, and follow-up instruction. And this is competency-based instruction. It is also another widely used example of backward design. Start from identify target tasks, describe required competency, identify language demands for each competency, develop syllabus, design teaching methods, and learning outcomes. And the last example, I'm going to present the standards and the common European framework of reference. Standards are descriptions of the outcomes or targets students should be able to reach in different domains of curriculum content, including language learning, and are generally specified in very general terms. For example, standards related to the use of both oral or written language could include students will develop knowledge and understanding of the relationship between text and context, cultural reference in text, the relationship between purposes and structures of the text, and language forms and features of the text according to MCK 2000. And from that, backward design with CEFR involves outcomes, syllabus, material and task, teaching and assessment. Okay, so that is my presentation about central design and backward design. In conclusion, we think that there is no universally best approach to curriculum design. Forward central and backward design can all work well, but in different situations, and each approach has its challenges and successful examples. In some cases, these approaches can be used together. This is our group conclusion, and these are the references. Thank you for listening.